Ask Reddit, people who know murderers, were there any signs that something was off? If so, what were they? My dad would always tell me about the crazy things his work friend would say. Things like how he was going to push his wife down the stairs, or put rat poison in her food. I told my dad that these weren't normal things to say and he should contact the police or at least his HR, but he would defend it saying that was just his sense of humor. He got arrested trying to hire a hitman to kill his wife, which ended up being a cop. It's a safe bet that at least 90% of advertised hitmen are undercover cops. A real hitman who doesn't want to get caught wouldn't advertise himself over the internet. My ex-husband and I were together 9 years and had 3 children together. He had his flaws, as everyone does, and there were a few things, like lying, that were an issue in the beginning. But he was a supportive husband and father and a great employee at a veterinary hospital for 7 years. Clients and animals loved him. When our daughter, youngest child, was a few months old, he started having an affair with a coworker of his. Ultimately, it ended our marriage. She had 2 kids from her previous marriage who were very close in age to 2 of mine. Eventually, my ex and this person got married and had 2 daughters of their own. 4 years ago, he murdered all 5 of them, the new wife and the 4 kids. Literally no one in his life could have said they saw anything indicating he would ever do something like that. ETA, he is still alive, trial ended recently. Jury recommended the death penalty. Wait, what? Thank God he didn't harm you or your children. Just out of high school, I spent 8 months in Australia. Met a family that I became really close to. We hung out a lot and I worked for him. I liked the wife and kids more than the husband. He was very narcissistic and far too interested in his 13-year-old daughter's friends. He got caught cheating on his wife for the 2nd or 3rd time and, when the marriage was falling apart, described to his soon-to-be ex-wife how he could kill her and make it look like an accident. Couple years later, he remarried, got caught cheating by the new wife. She wasn't as forgiving as the first wife and threatened divorce before she died, exactly as he had described how he would kill his ex. She, the ex-wife, called the police and they re-examined the accident, found the chunk of wood he hit her with before he loaded her in the car and pushing it over a cliff. Serving life in prison. Edit. He died of cancer in prison in 2017. I had a friend who married a guy who treated her like ass. She told me 2 things that I believed wholeheartedly, that if anyone ever hurt her kids, she would KLL them and that someday she would KLL her husband. Well, guess who she caught abusing their youngest? He was allowed visitation with the children and he had connections, so the child abuse allegations were dismissed. Guess who was shot and clad? I would trust that woman with my life. I know that sounds weird, but she is one of the best people I've ever met. A former coworker tried to murder his girlfriend and spent some time in prison for attempted murder. Got out, moved to Florida, and promptly murdered his new girlfriend. Dude was f***ing red flags up and down. Needlessly aggressive over small matters, insanely prideful, and willing to argue about basically any disagreement. None of the women I worked with were comfortable around him, and some straight up called him dangerous and wouldn't be in the same room as him. We worked an office job and he actually thumped his chest at me with his fists, yelling about seniority. He ate some of the first girlfriend's face while stabbing her in the chest multiple times. She tried to get him to be kept in prison and to warn his new girlfriend, but he dismissed her as crazy and blowing things out of proportion. He cut the second girlfriend's throat because he thought she danced with someone else. One of my former co-workers decided to shoot a house all because a dog was barking in the backyard of a different house, went on a shooting spree, killing the entire family except for the infant that was on the 2nd floor. Only thing that was off was his drinking problem. For 4 years, I worked 4 desks away from someone who was arrested and convicted of a 32-year-old cold case murder. Dude was an asshole, but didn't give off murder vibes. The general reaction was, huh, I hope his replacement is less of a D. I worked for a guy that went to kick the guy's ass that was molesting his daughter. The molester pulled a gun, and in the fight my old boss killed him with his own gun. My boss served 6 years in Louisiana Penitentiary. Last I saw him he had full custody of his daughter. I've posted about it before, but a kid down the street talked about offing squirrels for fun. He was 7-ish years old. He moved away and we forgot about him. 20 years later, we saw him in the news for brutally ending his parents. My former manager clad his wife and attempted to make it look like a suicide. He did this because he was ultra-religious and cheating on his wife with multiple women he found online. The church he was a member frowned upon divorce, so he thought murder would be a better alternative. The story has been on Dateline and other shows. He was a super strange dude, and when I found out, I wasn't completely surprised. His office always smelled like farts. Knew a girl as a freshman in college who was mean, obviously mentally unstable, and not too bright. When her fraternal twin sister fell in love with a good friend of mine, she became enraged with jealousy and could not let it go. Her sister begged her to get help, and there was a huge blowout in a hallway on campus where my friend had to intervene to prevent his girlfriend from getting stabbed by her sister. The police were called to campus, and she spent a week in jail before her sister decided to not press charges. Her remaining friends dropped out of her life because of her actions and unwillingness to get help. She got kicked out of college shortly after threatening the guidance counselor who was giving her one last chance and moved back in with her parents. When her sister went home for Christmas with my friend to introduce him to her parents, I told him to watch his back. They hadn't even made it all the way into the house before they were attacked and repeatedly stabbed. My friend died on the porch and she died at the hospital the next day. The murderous sister was beaten to death in a jail fight a few days later. I met their older brother, who I didn't even know existed, at the funeral for the good sister. He said he had gone no contact with the family years before for his own protection because his parents refused to do anything about the mental health problems that his little sister always had, even as a small child. R.I.P. Derek. Miss you, buddy. Edit, I started college in the 80s. Time does heal, but rarely completely. Thank you for the condolences. Mental health resources were scarce and highly stigmatized back then, and I hope that anyone going through something similar gets the help they need. No. He clad his sister's wrist with a baseball bat. My dad, who is elderly, goes to the coffee shop every day and has his regular coffee house friends. There was one guy, who I met a few times and my dad had coffee with often, who just seemed like a typical normal guy. In fact, my dad's dog loved this man. Not only did he end up being a murderer, it was like sick, twisted murder. My dad said he could be a little odd, but he never get creepy/weird vibes from him. I spent a lot of time at a friend's house when I was 6 to 9 years old. He had a brother who was like 3 years older than us, who I remember as being generally nice, but I have one weird memory of him absolutely losing his shit when he tried to teach me and his brother to rollerblade, and I couldn't get it, like throwing things and weeping uncontrollably. When I was in high school, found out that he had joined the military, and while he was deployed, he got court-martialed for KLLNG civilians and keeping body parts, fingers, ears, as trophies. Went to high school with a guy who murdered his parents because he got bad grades in college and didn't want them to see his report card. I'm not saying anyone expected this, but if his high school class had voted for most likely to bludgeon their parents to death with a baseball bat, he would have won unanimously. Edit, several people are asking, but what was he like? What he was like was someone who would murder his parents over bad grades. But if that's not clear enough, here's a reply I made, which I'm copying for visibility. It's hard to describe, maybe because people like him are thankfully rare. He was smart, honors student. He wasn't a social outcast, but nobody was close to him, and nobody would have described him as a friend, I think because everyone felt there was something odd about him. When talking about him, everyone, always, referred to him by his first and last names, never just Alex. We had a family friend that owned a farm, super awesome dude. Then I guess two guys tried to break into his house in the middle of the night and he shot them with a shotgun and killed them. And for whatever reason, instead of calling the police and claiming stand your ground and protection of property, he cut them up and fed them to his pigs. Got life for mutilation of a corpse and some other shit. Edit, talked to my pops a few minutes ago to get more details. His full name was Dennis Rodney Walker. He owned several farms. We visited his farm in Milton, Florida, but the murders occurred in California. The only thing I can find online is his appeal and his redaction of his appeal. If anyone wants to do more digging, by all means, this is all I could find with a quick search of his name. I've met several after the fact, but this is about one I met weeks before the murder. My then husband and I were hanging out and met up with a friend of his and the friend's girlfriend. The friend gets a call from his brother and invites him join us. The brother arrives and pretty soon afterwards, the whole vibe changed. My ex knew both men since all three were kids, so he was relaxed enough to start drinking around them. I was babysitting a wine cooler because I'm the next thing to a teetotaler and was the designated driver. I kept noticing the brother staring at me, but tried to ignore it, but it quickly became very uncomfortable. I'm nothing special to look at facially. I got the mom bod on lock and I was with my husband. The brother then asks me why I'm not drinking. I explained that I'm not a real drinker and added that I like to be aware of who and what's around me. So he asked my husband why I wasn't drinking. I don't remember his response, but dude looks at me and says, "We need to get you drunk." I left to go sit in the car, because WTF was that? I didn't feel safe or protected because my ex wasn't even paying attention. About 20 minutes later, dude walks up to my car and asks if I can take him to the corner store. I reminded him that he had a car and he replied that he couldn't drive because he'd been drinking. I told him I wouldn't take him, which led to us staring at each other in silence for several moments. He broke the silence by saying, "I bet you're real loyal." A loyal girl. A good girl. I know that motherfucker, get anything he want from you. Then, he laughed and walked away. When I told my ex the next day, he wasn't bothered and was making excuses for the friend's brother's behavior. A few weeks later, there was a report on the news about the body of a woman being found in my ex's old neighborhood. Find out later, she's been ped and murdered. It didn't take long to find and arrest her clerk, aka the friend's brother. One of my uncles murdered his wife. He was out of jail by the time I was a kid. Yes, there was always something off about him. My mother told me he was always violent and had a sadistic streak. He liked to make people afraid. He mellowed out as he got older, but he was always a user and always looking to take advantage where he could. I'm pretty sure he was a sociopath. My mother had a lot of siblings, and he was the only one like this. Thank you for watching, friend. This was a tough video to make, but I hope you still enjoyed it. Stay hydrated and until next time.